Alright, Keith here from rcMart. So by now you've probably seen our live box opening, and now we're going to build the entire T4 18. To start off, we're going to build the gear differential. For this build, we're going to use the gear diff oil that they have provided, the 3000 here. For these gears, you can see they're molded, so make sure to take off the burrs on the side for a smooth diff. In the instruction manual, it tells you to add some oil to the outdrive because there's quite a bit of friction between the cup and the plastic case. After doing that, you'll see it's much freer. I also like to add some oil to the O-ring. It looks like they've changed the material of the gear diff pins. You can see here, the different color, more of a bronze color compared to last year's silver. Make sure that outdrive turns freely once you've assembled the gear onto it. This cross member is not in a mold, but make sure you take off these burrs here. Once again, make sure everything is free. An important thing to keep in mind when building gear diffs is the amount of oil you add to each diff. So in the manual they suggest 1.3 grams, and how we get this is first we get some scales. It reads 0, so put it on. Now it reads 8.2, so if you add 1.3 grams of oil, you should get 9.5 grams in the end. There you have it, 9.5 grams of oil. Now we go ahead and install the diff. So you can see the notches on the casing. Make sure you line those up, otherwise you won't be able to put the diff together. I like to place the paper gasket on here first, on the first install. And then we put this together. You might not be able to see it here, but I've not fully tightened these 4 screws yet. What you want to do is keep them fairly loose at the start and then tighten them equally both sides to get a more... Tighten each screw until they're just tight and then tighten them a tiny bit more. I like to tighten them opposite sides so you get more balance. There you have it, a complete diff. Alright, after building the diff, we're going to do the central transmission. Xray have packed everything in nice little bags, so it's very easy to find everything. Having a little tray like this to hold all your screws makes life much more easy. So these bulkheads have a little indent for putting this bearing for the roll bar. Make sure you have these in the correct direction. So you see this plate here, there's a little dent. Make sure that's facing the correct direction, otherwise you won't be able to use the screws. So a small tip for installing the inline chassis flex adjustment plate is to screw these front and back screws first, so make sure it'll be straight when you install it. So you see here, fully tighten the front and most backward screw first, and then tighten these screws. Alright, here's all the bulkheads installed. Onto the lay shaft assembly. The pulley is held together by E-clip. Make sure not to lose it when you're installing it. You can use the edge of your driver to push it in. Like the gear diff, don't tighten one screw all the way at the start. Tighten 3 screws equally to get a more flat spur installation. Like the other side, just use the edge of your driver to install the E-clip. So now we're installing the transmission bits. When you're installing the lay shaft, make sure you have the belts on, otherwise you'll have to redo the whole process again if you forget the belts. Here we have the spool. Make sure to install this other side of the flange, otherwise your belt will fall off. So install bearings before installing the outdrive, otherwise it won't go in. When installing the spool out drive, because it's plastic, make sure to back off when you feel it's getting tight. With new belts, it may seem too tight at the start if you put it in the default hole, default slot. But after a few runs, it'll get loose, so make sure to check the belts after new runs. The upper bulkheads, make sure to note the direction which they install onto the chassis. So a little trick I've learned with installing shock towers is to loosen these top 4 screws first. And then tighten the shock tower screws. So you have a perpendicular install and prevent any tweak to your chassis. And then retighten these 4 screws. So do the same thing as the front. So if you hold it down as well, it makes it a flatter install as well. And then retighten the top 4 screws. And there you have it. Transmission installed. One tip for building the shocks is to have the shock shaft at all the same length. Usually we have them at 9mm, you measure it here. And you see 9mm. Do this for all shocks to get a car that will track straight. Here we're using the oil that comes with the kit, 400 CST. Users may change oil suiting their tracks. Fill the oil to the top of the shock body and pull the shock shaft, and you can see a lot of air bubbles coming up. And then leave the shock on the side and then wait till the air bubbles are gone. Next up we'll do the arms. New arms might have some stiction on the pin. Just check it by doing this action. If the arms aren't smooth, you can use a 3mm reamer and just give it a You can see the arm is much more smoother on the pin after doing that. Do this on the outside hole as well. Check with the same pin. You can see the arm is very smooth on the pin. When screwing the drip screw into the arm, you may feel it's very tight and hard to screw in. One tip you can do is add some oil onto the set screw here. Here I'll just use the oil that comes with the kit. There are several different suspension holders for you to choose from, but for now we'll just use the kit default setup. The suspension mounts have markings on them so that you don't install them in the wrong position. After tightening the suspension holders, make sure the suspension is free. See how this arm does not come down? It means you have to loosen the suspension holders and do them again. Push onto the arm to create more space. See how the arm is free now? It means it. See how this side is still a bit sticky? It means you need to retighten the suspension mounts. See how both sides are free now? It means that the suspension is smooth. When assembling the rear arms, check for sticky suspension as well. See this side does not come back down. It means you need to redo the suspension now. Check each side again, see how it's free. It means you have free suspension. Alright, now you can see there are no air bubbles left. It means you can install the shock bladder. Depending on how much rebound you want, before you insert the bladder, push the shock shaft up or down. For this build, I'm going to go with full rebound. So the whole shock shaft is pulled out. Wrap the tissue around the shock shaft as such, and then slowly put the bladder on an angle. Use your finger to push excess oil out. Wipe off any excess and install the top cap. Hold the top holder and screw the top cap on. Clean off any excess oil on the shock body. Make sure not to lose these suspension inserts as they will be useful later on. Take note, there are two different size grub screws. The long one goes in the back and the short one goes in the front. Leave around 2mm of grub screw hanging out. If you screw it in too tight, it might damage the arm. Next up, we're going to build the steering system. For time saving, we've already built turnbuckles. Here you can see there are different notches on different sides. Each side tells you which side to turn to tighten them. If you have trouble tightening the post on, it has a slot for you to use your turnbuckle tool to hold it in place. Xray have included these servo mounts for when you want to use the floating steering system. A little update on the shocks. If you build them as per the manual, the shock shaft will be too long and it will dig into the ball end and make the ball unsmooth. You'll need at least 9.5 millimeters for this length here, right here. At least 9.5. Otherwise you'll destroy the ball end. Now we'll finish up the suspension bits. To build the universals, use this black grease that comes with the kit. Make sure to not use it too much, otherwise it will attract dirt. You can use the tip to apply the grease towards the inside. Slide this piece in. You can see on the pin there's a flat spot for you to secure the grub screw. Make sure the grub screw is onto the flat spot. When tightening the grub screw onto the drive shaft, it's recommended to add some thread lock. Make sure it is smooth. Onto the C-hubs. They have markings for left and right so that you don't mix them up. And for these collars, the short ones go on the top and the longer one goes on the bottom. You can make sure that the screw is not open tightened when you fully tighten it and back it off by 1/8 of a turn. Make sure the steering knuckle is smooth on the C-hub. So fast forward, we have built the turnbuckles. So the length doesn't really matter at the moment because you can adjust it later when you put the car on the setup station. Make sure to use the long ball stud at the end on the upright side, otherwise you won't have enough thread to thread it in. So the same applies to the rear upright. You need it to be smooth, so you can test it by just moving it back and forth. When installing the set screw, make sure to not screw it in too tight, otherwise you'll strip the hub. When installing the turnbuckles, you can see there's an edge on one side. Make sure they're all facing the same way on the front, on the left and right, so that adjusting it is screwing it the same direction. There are two different lengths of pins. Make sure the long one goes in the rear. And there you have it, all the suspension bits installed. Make sure everything is free before continuing. One tip to installing these ball ends is to install them first before screwing it onto the long ball end, because it's really hard to install. Notice the three dotted one goes into the back. As per usual, make sure this is free. After installing the sway bar, make sure both arms lift up the same on both sides. You can see they're relatively even. As you can see, the right hand side drops a tiny bit more, and we'll fix that once we do the droop. It tells you to use spacers underneath the shock ends, but they don't come with aluminium bits, only plastics. So I would change those to aluminium. And that's a T4 2018 completed.